Hi, everyone. It's Mark Thurman with the MIT Enterprise Forum's MIT Connected Things Conference, and I'm here with Dr. Shane Rooney from the GSMA. Before we introduce ourselves further, I wanted to share a few things for the parts of the audience that may not be familiar with what we're doing. The MIT Enterprise Forum was founded roughly 42 years ago in 1978 as a way for entrepreneurs with MIT backgrounds to informally help each other with their early stage companies and their business plans. Since that time, it's expanded into a global organization. We're part of the Cambridge organization, Cambridge, Massachusetts, in the US, that is, just to be precise. And one of our primary objectives with the Connected Things Conference in particular is to gather thought leaders, industry leaders, emerging companies, and those interested in the topic of IoT together, typically in the springtime at the MIT Media Lab. A little side note, the MIT Media Lab is the place that the term Internet of Things is said to have been coined in 1999. A gentleman called Kevin Ashton hastily was looking for a title for his presentation, which was at that point around RFID. And the word internet was a very trendy term back in those days. So he very quickly, according to many interviews that he's given, put the term Internet of Things on the title slide and dashed off to give his presentation. Anyway, we run these conferences generally in the spring. COVID has entered all of our lives and caused us some disruption, and we've rescheduled it hopefully for September. Shane will be hopefully one of our presenters in some form at the upcoming conference. These conferences typically have themes. Past years have been a theme about IoT and disruption. Another year was The Future Arrives. We've talked about accelerating adoption and the market is here. This year's theme, the 2020 theme, is to have been, or is still, this notion of linking IoT with artificial intelligence and machine learning to create a new computing model. Today, what we'll talk about a little bit more is, as I introduce Shane, is 5G, mobile IoT, and we'll talk, since we are in this COVID time period and we're all doing these calls from home, we'll talk about the impact of COVID. So Shane, welcome. Thank you for doing this with me. It's always good to work with you. Could you perhaps introduce yourself, your role, and then let's talk a little bit about the GSMA.
Hi, Mark. It's great to talk to you and great to talk to the home of the Internet of Things. Little did Kevin know what he started all those years ago. And I've been actually working on IoT for quite a while in terms of way back to when it was called telemetry, to telematics, to machine,
ADA.
and now and now, you know, everybody knows exactly what IoT is. And whilst I've been working across the IoT ecosystem, from devices to networks, to actually starting my own companies, but also to working with customers and being the end customer and the user in connected vehicles for some time, I finally end up at the GSMA, in which I hopefully I'm sharing my knowledge and experience within the organization and able to do so on a global basis. But not many people will sort of know who the GSMA are. And I would like to just quickly share a little bit about who the GSMA are. So the GSMA represents the mobile industry on a global basis. So that's all the mobile operators that you know, like AT&T, Verizon, Vodafone, as we talked about. And also the ecosystem, the module manufacturers, the infrastructure providers like Ericsson, Nokia. And we work with all these companies to ensure that customers have the best possible experience of mobile technology and services that brings to everybody. And we touch everyone's lives because most people have a mobile phone. And obviously, we wanted to expand that into IoT, and we're seeing more and more connectivity with machines. And that's the area that I work in, and that's the experience that I actually bring. So I'd like to, talk a little bit more about that.
Sure, absolutely. So just to fine tune a little bit, if I'm working for a large phone company, as you said, a Vodafone, a Telefonica, Telstra, Telus, whomever, Verizon, I would join GSMA. I would be a participant in activities and conferences. When the trade show stuff resumes, hopefully I'd have a stand. What are some of the other things that GSMA provides? I noticed on your slide, and you don't have to put it back up, but you talked a little bit about regulatory, which I think is something that people don't quite follow all the time, but I know it's very important.
Yeah, it's much more than events. I mean, we're known obviously for events, but some of the work that happens in the background and some of our membership, how they come together and how they collaborate on technology, but also, as you mentioned, on regulatory issues. Things like spectrum is very important, and very important that we have harmonized spectrum as much as we can throughout the world, because that's important in terms of how we make devices and how we communicate. If we're operating in different spectrum frequencies and we don't have the bandwidth, we're not able to meet customer needs. So it's important that we work together, work with governments and regulators and organizations who set standards to make that happen. So that's some of, if you like, probably hidden work that the GSMA do. And of course, the standards organization 3GPP is very important for us as well.
No, it makes total sense. I mean, if I'm broadcasting and you can't receive, it's a fairly useless endeavor. So
yeah, if you go back to say 20 years ago, or let's go back to 1G, way back. There was in Europe, there was different systems in every different country.
That's right.
The US was on a different technology. I think you could only use it in Korea if you happen to be going there. And now we have, yeah.
Versus GSM.
And so we've put the GFM into the GSMA part of things.
There you go. So let's kind of fine tune a little bit more on IoT. So IoT, from my standpoint, is putting a sensor on a thing, on a machine, on a car, connecting it to a network, and then doing really cool things with it, managing the information, maybe controlling the device, getting information from the device. If it's in the factory, is the thing working? If it's in the field, is the pump leaking or not? But could you talk from your perspective a little bit more about IoT, mobile IoT, and maybe even highlight what are some of the largest verticals?
Yeah, sure. So if we look at cellular, I mean, cellular has been around for 20, 25 years now, and it's always connected things, machines, but was never really designed to actually do that. So we had to sort of look at how we could connect machines in the most efficient way. And that's why about 4 years ago, we looked at how cellular technology should be used to connect machines rather than people. And there was a little bit of a gap in terms of that. We needed a new type of technology to connect machines. And it's a term that we called Mobile IoT technology. And there wasn't a standard when we got involved in this, and we helped to accelerate those standards in 3GPP. which what we know now today as LTE-M and narrowband IoT. And they were specifically designed for connecting machines. And what was different about them, this particular technology, mobile IoT technology, is that we were looking at where we needed better coverage. We needed to be able to access things like basements, to read meters, parking sensors, and some of these devices wouldn't actually be connected to mains electricity, so would be running on batteries. So we needed to be able to use these devices using batteries, and they had to have a long-term time. You couldn't be changing the batteries every week or 2 weeks or month. They had to last up to 10 years. And it was able to send tiny pieces of information as well. And also, there was a cost issue when you're connecting, say, utility meters. There is a cost to doing that. So the cost of the module, cost of operation was pretty important. So we got involved in that fairly early on, and got the industry together to create these standards, which we have launched now. There has been it's nearly 140 particular launches on those networks right now. And that's brought like 150 million new connections by the end of 2019 to mobile operators. But it was a good example of how the cellular industry would come together and work to create a IoT cellular-based low-powered wide area network.
So let me interject, Shane.
Yeah.
On the right hand portion of your slide, you talk about mobile IoT roaming between some of our friends, Vodafone, Swisscom, T-Mobile, and et cetera. For those of us in the States where roaming is not a thing, could you talk about the importance of that? Because I think it's, again, in the connected car realm, this is an asset that moves. So perhaps kind of fine tune on that a little bit, please.
Yeah, so it's pretty important to look at things from an enterprise manufacturer's perspective. They view things on a global basis. So if you have a fixed mobile solution like a parking center utility, or that's okay. That traffic lights, they're not going anywhere. Right. But a lot of IoT solutions are actually mobile, so they need to be able to cross boundaries. And Europe is perhaps, I use Europe as an example here, but there's no reason that doesn't apply to North America as well, where you're going cross boundaries into Mexico and into Canada. It is still a requirement by a lot of users, the end users, the customers need that mobility, especially when you're looking at logistics type solutions, which a lot of these are, and we'll be talking maybe a little bit about that in a while. So roaming is pretty important, and it's something we have got involved with it as well.
So part of the role of the organization is to facilitate these discussions and help set standards in a sense. Is that it?
Exactly. It was pretty important. It was a big requirement to get roaming for these types of technologies. And another part, I think, which may touch for the MIT audience is really about innovation. We also decided to look at creating a community of innovators around this technology, perhaps something that's never been done with cellular technology, because we're opening up a new audience in IoT, and we wanted those to get involved, those who may not have looked at cellular technology in the past, to see how they could use it and what was different about that. And we have a very good community now with over nearly 3,000, I think, innovators involved and engaged in the ecosystem, from somebody who's operating in their garage to larger companies.
Well, that's interesting. That's part of our core audience at the Connected Things conference. Again, I don't want to sidetrack us a bit, but in addition to having a conference where we have keynotes and panels and all that, we have what we call our IoT village, where we go after that very community of innovators. They're early stage companies typically. They get a little, not even a stand, they get a table, and we, our hope is that our attendees, of which there are roughly 450 to 500 or so, when we do have these conferences, get to see something that maybe was in the lab two or 3 months ago, and may not have received any significant funding. And to me, the magic always happens when a person with a new novel IoT device gets to meet. We saw this a year or two ago when the head of Amazon Web Services IoT group, Dirk Didascalou, was able to meet with folks that literally were just in the lab weeks before coming up with their devices, and exchange ideas and find ways to do business. So I think the innovator community and your focus on innovation is one of the reasons that I think the MIT Enterprise Forum and the GSMA should be doing more together.
Absolutely. And to touch on the point that we talked about earlier about having a global view, if you're an IoT innovator and you have an idea and you've developed it in the US, you need to look at it and see, where else, how can I expand this market? If I'm successful in the US, how can I be successful in Europe? Well, if the technology is the same in the US as it is in Europe, that's your market straight away. And that is the beauty of using mobile IoT technology. It will work in other countries, and therefore
it's scale. So global scale is important to every business plan that I've ever looked at. So I think that's great.
Yeah. So I'm just sharing here of where we are today, and what is also interesting is if you look at the purple part of this map. You're seeing both technologies, and they're complementary technologies depending on the use case, being offered more and more. So we're going to see this map become more and more purple as we go forward.
And for the audience, NB-IoT, narrowband IoT, is low bandwidth, and LTE-M is higher bandwidth. Is that a good way to?
Well, it's really down to the use case. I mean, you do get a more variable bandwidth with LTE-M, which is, it depends. So if you're looking more of a mobile type of application like logistics, then you could argue that LTE-M is perhaps better for that, whereas a fixed mobile application like a road sensor or parking sensor or a meter, which is not going anywhere, you get more densification on NB-IoT. So you get more meters in one particular area connected compared to LTE-M.
Is an NB-IoT better for power usage? So, long-lived battery is more on the NB-IoT side, or is it on both?
I think it's pretty similar. Again, it comes down to the use case and how many messages you need to send a day. If you're typically only sending say 50 byte message, 50 kilobyte message a day, it won't make any difference. The battery power.
Makes sense. So let's, if we can, let's talk a little bit about 5G. And the importance for IoT. 5G's been in the news. We're not going to go through the towers and the crazy conspiracy theories and all that stuff on this, which is insanity. But talk about 5G, and I'll just frame it up as I attended a very interesting talk at MIT, coincidentally, by a professor there, where she talked about 5G as an umbrella standard that pulls in all the other 4G, all the other IoT standards underneath it, or attempts to, and it even brings in a flavor of Wi-Fi, which is, I think, out of scope perhaps for GSMA. But could you talk about 5G overall, and then if we're taking tiny bits of application, why do you need 5G for IoT?
So that term umbrella is a very good term to describe 5G. 5G is very, very different to all the other Gs that went forward, because what we have seen is over the last up to 4G, this increase in speed and capability, and 5G is that umbrella, or I like to actually call it a suite of services. So it's going to incorporate narrowband and broadband, but everyone focuses on the broadband thing and sort of say, oh, and low latency, you know, that type of thing. Whereas the bulk of it actually will be narrowband and the massive machine type communications. So you need to take that into account when you're looking at IoT. But so there's a lot of confusion out there. When I talk to enterprise manufacturers, and some of them, as you can see down at the bottom left-hand side here, you know, we went and actually spoke to these guys who were adopting narrowband IoT and LTE-M. And a common question from them was, well, should I wait until 5G before I connect my device, whether that was a smoke alarm or a industrial compressor? What, you know, will I wait till 5G? And we wanted to get across to them, no, this is all part of 5G. This is an evolution into 5G from a narrowband perspective. And this is important for those customers, those manufacturers, because they've got product life cycles that are going to be 15-year plus. And they don't want that technology, the connected technology, changing within that time. So we've got a big job in the cellular industry. Get this across that what you're investing now will be part of 5G. And 5G will develop in different areas, including the broadband for IoT. We've seen a lot of visual IoT applications that will need that broadband capability. But the vast majority of things will just be narrowband in that area. And so carriers will have to look at this area in terms of engaging with enterprises and understand the enterprise's requirements rather than just providing a connectivity service. And of course, they must be technically ready to meet that demand when it comes. But they can't just do it on their own. They're going to have to collaborate with other players, other people who are involved specifically in the industry, but also innovators and developers will be bringing fresh new ideas. And this is really important that carriers get involved with them.
So what about the other Gs? We talked about 1G, which I don't know if it's a real thing, but
it's gone.
It's gone.
That's analog.
When I was active working for one of the larger telcos, the same one that you worked at, or one of the ones that you worked at, we were talking about 3G and the elimination of 2G. Now we're on 4G, et cetera, et cetera. So what of 2G, 3G, 4G? What happens to that?
Well, some carriers have certainly eliminated 2G and some are 3G and have plans to remove that. And that's really about spectrum more than anything else. So this evolution will actually happen. 2G, 3G will sort of evolve into 5G. Its spectrum will be reformed, but in terms of the service that you get, it remains the same. So when we come to 4G, 4G is actually going to be part of 5G, and that's what I mean about this suite of services. it is going to be there. There will be use cases in which 4G solutions will be delivering under the 5G brand. So that's why we call it the 5G era. And that's where it all comes together, really. And that's why 5G is very much different to anything that has gone beforehand.
So I think if I'm a manufacturer of things that I wish to connect, really I have a great series of choices available to me from a connectivity standpoint, depending on the use case and depending on the global audience, the enterprise audience, enterprise versus consumer, et cetera. So in a sense, I shouldn't be worried if I'm either an enterprise customer or a maker of things, because whatever my use case or whatever my requirements are, there's a connectivity technology that will meet my need. Is that a good way to put it?
Exactly. So yeah, what we've got today, like LTE-M and Narrowband IoT, will be part of the 5G story. It will evolve. It's part of, it'll coexist. It'll be part of the 5G components and will be there for a long, long time.
Excellent. So let's pivot slightly, since again I'm broadcasting from my basement. You're in your study, and let's talk about, as your slide just indicates, let's talk about IoT in the COVID era, in the pandemic era. What's been the impact of the pandemic globally on IoT use cases? I can think of a few use cases, certainly here in the States, without getting political, around tracking medical gear. Not only where is it, but what state is it in? In other words, is it ready? Does it need to be cleaned and redeployed? And I've had many conversations with industry leaders in that realm around leveraging IoT, putting a connected sensor on a medical device and then deploying it to the field and that's one of the earlier use cases that we saw in the IoT or the M2M world, which is, asset tracking fundamentally. But what's changed during the last several months from your view?
Sure. So I'm going to share with you some data that GSMA Intelligence have put together. And there are in-house analysts who've been tracking the whole COVID-19 and the impact of that, specifically on 5G and IoT and what that means. So it's no surprise that there has been a huge impact on demand and supply over the last few months for all of us. And different parts of the world, that has changed as well, because obviously China came out of this and stabilized through March, while the rest of us were falling over that cliff. And therefore everything sort of came to a halt, and that's not just in IoT, it's everything, as we know. But I wanted to talk in terms of digital transformation and what that actually means. This was already on the agenda for enterprises, but what it means is that there's going to be some impacts, a short-term impact and medium-term and a long-term. I just want to explain a little bit about that. Obviously, short term, there's huge supply chain issues, and that goes for IoT, and it goes for the end customers. And we're seeing that impacted in terms of projects for, say, utilities and health, manufacturing, because raw materials are not there. We have government measures, and that varies from country to country. In terms of movement of people, very strict in some countries, not so strict in others, but it means that goods, people, material are not just getting there, and people are not working. And in terms of projects have been put on hold or cancelled. But we also have seen, there is this greater need of operational visibility, particularly in the supply chain, and that's good for IoT in terms of how we build upon that. So in terms of how we solve a problem. Of course, software tools, the growth of cloud, we're going to see quite a lot of that and a need for it. We will have pressure on CapEx, medium term. Replacement cycles are going to get longer, so customers are going to sweat assets more. But there is going to be a need for automation. And then again, that's an indicator to IoT in terms of stepping in and solving that problem. And, from 2025 onwards, we are going to see that digital transformation. But there is an immediate impact to IoT, and some of these big ticket projects will be impacted as we go along. How does that pan out in terms of, growth and what was predicted before COVID and now post-COVID? Well, if nothing changes, we still are going to see the APAC region as the biggest growth area, not impacted as much as North America and Europe, as you can see from this chart. We are going to be hit pretty hard in North America and Europe.
But there's still substantial growth in connections based on that prior chart.
Absolutely. And there's good news and bad news in this. It's really about timelines. The timelines are going to be impacted for 2020. But because of this, there is a greater need for automation. There is a greater need of visibility of what's happening within a customer's operations. And that is opportunity for IoT, regardless of what industry vertical you are working in IoT.
That makes complete sense. More dependent. Everything goes virtual, which means there's more dependency on the cloud. There's more dependency on connecting things because you don't have people actively working in place in their office environment, as an example. I mean, it makes perfect sense.
And that's what operators are seeing right now, because most people are using cellular connectivity, whether it's Wi-Fi or 4G or whatever it is right now, to communicate with others. So carriers are seeing firsthand where the demand is, and they're seeing a demand for cloud infrastructure. And for when is 5G going to be here? That's the big thing. And private networks from an industry point of view as well.
So if I looked at the cloud and infrastructure bar, so that would be things as a service, so platforms as a service, hosted platform, exactly. Analytics in the cloud, storage in the cloud, I'm assuming, all of that nature.
Everything. Yeah, absolutely.
Got to store the bits from all these data points somewhere. That makes total sense.
Yeah.
I don't see the word security on this particular chart. I know that at every conference that not only I've attended in the last 5 years, but the ones I host, security typically is the first 3 words out of anyone's mouth. How does that fit in this particular scenario during the COVID time period?
Well, we would obviously argue, Mark, that carriers are the most secure providers you could possibly get. We manage over 8 billion connections on a global basis in a very secure area. So it's sort of implicit, if it's not explicit, in this slide, that security is a hygiene factor for everything here.
I think it's an interesting point. Obviously, I'm talking to you and you work with all the operators of the carriers. I've worked with and for several carriers here in the Americas and in Europe. I don't think people understand that for carriers, it's a 7/24 managed service. And if their stuff is not working well, if there's a problem, if there's a security threat, there's someone there all the time, holidays, on weekends, and all of that. And it's different than a roll your own network, I suppose.
And I think how carriers have performed through this pandemic is testament to how robust the networks actually are, to have this massive increase in demand on their networks. It truly has stretched them. And in terms of performance and delivery, they've stepped up to the plate on this one. It's there, and it shows it is working, and that you can rely on them in terms of connectivity.
And we've seen that here. Just speaking from the States, I've seen that here with the operators that I either subscribe to or work with.
I think this is the last one, and this is really sort of a summary in terms of, what is the impact on IoT and 5G. So it's really about timelines. We're going to see a lot of delays in terms of projects because there's operational problems. But towards the end of the year, we're going to see some sort of demand or acceleration for IoT projects. But ultimately, we're not going to see IoT type use cases on 5G for maybe another 1 to 2 years.
That's interesting. Okay, it's interesting. But one would have to assume some impact from this pandemic on deployments and rollouts. So that makes complete sense. So
here's just an advert for our guys who put all this stuff together in GSMA Intelligence. So please feel free to contact them at any time, or myself, and I can put you in touch with the right people.
As a person that puts these conferences and things together, I do look quite a bit at the GSMA Intelligence page. This is an unsolicited bit of marketing from my end, but the data is valid. It's good data. It doesn't it doesn't have a bias, and it's global in terms of its reach. So I actually do find it quite useful in any of the presentations that I do. This has been, I think, an excellent talk. Hopefully we'll be able to do this live at the MIT Media Lab. For those that are interested in attending, you can Google MIT Connected Things. I think there's a mitconnectedthings.com. You can follow me on Twitter at Thurman, and check up with me on any of the issues related to the conference. Also, the MIT Enterprise Forum, you can just check that page out just for progress on the conference. Hopefully we'll have it this fall. If not, it'll be back in the March timeframe. Shane, I hope to see you at one of the many conferences that the many Mobile World Congress conferences as they start to roll back out. And I really want to thank you, your team, Jackie, for putting this together, and the folks on the market research side at the GSMA Intelligence for assisting with the data. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark.